strapline says making wealth work. Now this encompasses not only helping people with their financial resources, but it's also enhancing their wealth of knowledge and their wealth of experiences. Tonight is about wealth of knowledge. This debate gives us the chance to inform ourselves of the most important vote the UK has seen for the last 40 years. This vote will affect our future and the future of generations too young to vote. And we should therefore make this decision an informed one. My thanks to the distinguished panel, and we look forward to hearing their views on this very complex issue. So without further delay, I'd like to hand over to our chairman for this evening, Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. First of all, can I congratulate Louise and Stephen for actually setting this up. Because this time last year we were discussing it, saying, well, come on, wouldn't it be fun if actually we got together and actually had a debate about this? Because there were all sorts of ideas of what the parties were going to be doing, but actually get together people who just actually wanted to understand what was supposed to be happening. Now, I'm delighted, of course, that Dave has managed to fit in with this and actually held back the decision until we've actually had this debate. And Steve will be reporting it later as to what the result's going to be. Tonight is actually really very straightforward indeed. You can see we have panellists here, and also you're here. And the whole point of this is we're going to have as many questions as we possibly can to try and get through. Now, very kindly, you've already provided us with some questions, which is very, very useful. Now, between now and roughly 8 o'clock, by that stage we'll be into Thursday again, we'll get as much as we possibly can in. How it's going to operate is like this. Basically, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, tell us what their experience, their background, obviously what their view is, unless they get terribly excited about it. And then once they've done that, I'm going to ask the key 5 there to give us about 3 or 4 minutes of their own particular views. And then we'll get some commentary on that, and very swiftly after that, just to open it up for all the questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Many stupid answers, which is why we have a parliament. And so it's up to you to try and sort of winkle out all these ideas and opinions. So without any more ado, let's actually meet the panel. So Alex, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Alex Jones. I'm an international business management student at the University of Gloucestershire. I'm in my 2nd year, and I've volunteered for tonight.
Now, it's like being on University Challenge, this really, isn't it? Alex Chalk.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Alex Chalk. I'm the Member of Parliament for Cheltenham. Prior to being elected, I was a barrister. I still am a barrister, but specialising in counter-terrorism, serious fraud and homicide.
That's a nice combination of jobs. Mark.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Mark Moore. I own and run a small manufacturing business consultancy called Bassam Moore Limited. I've worked all over the world in senior management roles, and I'm pleased to be here tonight.
Okay, now the first of our 2 doctors, Dr. Jim.
Hello everybody, my name is Jim Keane, as you can see from the front. I'm a lecturer in economics at the local university, University of Gloucestershire. I've taken a big interest in this obviously over the years, given various lectures, and I'm very much looking forward to the debate tonight.
So in terms of economics then, you're an expert in quantitative easing and such like?
Yes, I think so.
Moving swiftly on with it.
Yes.
Hello everybody, my name is Jun Zhang, and I'm the course leader for undergraduate international business programs at the University of Gloucestershire. And I have been studying and living in the UK for just over 15 years.
Thank you. Christina.
I'm Christina Simmons. I'm a local businesswoman. I specialise very much in human potential and in investors in people. Some of you may have heard of it. I'm also the chairman of the local branch of UKIP, so it's pretty obvious where my views tend to stand.
Okay, right, Claire.
I'm Claire Thayers. I'm also a local businesswoman. I'm a consultant specialising in social responsibility. I wear many hats, not only running my own business, but I'm also currently working with Visit England and Visit Britain, promoting the South West region. So there was a £5 million pot of money that was allocated to the South West to promote ourselves abroad. So I'm working on that at the moment. I'm also working with the Association of Gloucestershire Chambers, and I'm a board member of the School of Social Entrepreneurs in Cornwall.
When you walked your way through the £5 million pot, what happens there?
Oh, well, we all go on holiday, obviously. It's obvious, Justin.
Now, Rupert, I wish to point out that Rupert may be sitting on the right wing of the panel. That does not reflect his political position at all.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Rupert Lowe. I feel a bit like a skeleton that's been brought out of the cupboard. I stood for the Referendum Party in the Cotswold constituency in 1997, where I managed to keep my deposit and send it back to Sir James Goldsmith. I was chairman of the Premier League Football Club for a while, where I built up their academy and also built them a new stadium. I'm involved in farming, stockbroking, and various other family contracting businesses, so and insurance. So that's me.
Well, the skeletons go, they're quite chatty.
Yeah.
Right, jolly good. Right, there is your panel overall. Now, we're going to ask 5 of them actually to have their 3 to 5 minute talk. So I have to concentrate on my watch for that. So start off with you first of all, Alex. Alex, 3 to 5 minutes for you. Off you go.
For me, right. Well, like Boris, Theresa May and Michael Gove, and indeed many others, I will be making my decision after careful thought, and only after the final offer is clear. It seems to me that that's a sensible way to approach it. But I think it's right to say that in light of recent events, my misgivings about remaining in the EU have probably increased rather than decreased. But speaking bluntly, I do feel torn on this issue. I may start from the vantage point. I'm a great admirer of David Cameron. I think he's a strong leader. I think he's a patriot. I think he has enormous intellect, which he combines for the most part with excellent judgment. And whatever happens in this referendum, I want him to stay as Prime Minister. I also agree with him, by the way, that leaving the EU would not be easy. It does carry risks. People who suggested the contrary are wrong, in my view. There could be a run on sterling. Renegotiating trade deals could be tortuous and uncertain. Ditching the European arrest warrant, something I have personal experience of, could delay and even impede justice. And something which weighs very heavily with me, our United Kingdom itself could be imperilled. So as a gradualist, even a Eurosceptic one, I'm instinctively drawn to the strategy of recalibrating our relationship, repatriating some powers, but without causing a permanent rupture. However, the conflagration in the Middle East and our ability to manage the migration pressures while remaining in the EU has started to shift the dial in my thinking. Because, of course, we need immigration. Our nation was built on it. New arrivals continue to add immeasurably to our economy and the richness of our culture. But there must be limits. And when immigration is too high, when the pace of change is too fast, the cohesion of society can be put at risk. It's also difficult for our schools and our hospitals and our infrastructure to plan and to cope. And so when you have a situation where annual net migration to the UK for the year ending June 2015 was over 330,000, and now, under EU free movement rules, the 1 million people admitted to Germany could in due course come to the UK, that creates concerns. Because, of course, not all of them would. Not even half of them would. But what if 200,000 did? How do we cope? And what if this is just the beginning? What if Iraq collapses? Or Libya? So whilst there is still some way to go, and I personally won't be rushed into making my decision, I respect the Prime Minister and I will listen to him very carefully. For me, the scales are starting to shift.
On to Christina.
I think one of the things that we are all going to be subjected to are dozens and dozens of statistics. And we all know the saying, there are lies, damned lies and statistics, because they can virtually mean anything to anybody. I think sometimes they are useful to have because they do start a factual debate. But I think what we're in danger of is a distraction from the main issue at cause here. And that is, who governs Britain? It is very simply, who are we ruled by? Elected politicians like Alex, who are answerable to us ultimately, or are we content that already we've handed over many of our freedoms to a political superstate? People in the country have been aware that despite voting to stay in, note not join the common market, progressively since then, more and more of our powers as a self-determining nation have been eroded. Successive treaties have taken away so many of our rights that something like 75% of our laws are now made or emanating from Brussels. Mr. Cameron's renegotiations, I don't believe, have addressed any fundamental issues that we need to think about. Our own self-determination, the right to control our borders, negotiate our own trade deals, nor the rampant waste and corruption which is evident in the EU. The latest figures show the accountants won't sign off the reports, the auditors rather won't sign off the accounts, because there's a £4.5 billion black hole. However, they have been voted to be accepted. No treaty changes are proposed by Mr Cameron's renegotiation, nor repatriation of any of those powers to this country. So we've moved away from being able to make our own trade deals. Our laws are subordinated to European courts. Our justice system has been changed dramatically by the introduction of the European arrest warrant. There's no trial by jury. There isn't a presumption of innocence, both things enshrined within Magna Carta. Those are not part of the European arrest warrant. The EU dictates our immigration policy, forcing us to exclude people from the rest of the world rather than having to say to some Europeans, no, you can't come in, but we can take doctors from India, or we can take relatives from Australia, whatever. Our businesses, all of them, are forced to comply with EU legislation, although only 15% of them actually are trading within the EU. It's a disincentive to small businesses. Mr Cameron's renegotiation, with talk of a red card to block new legislation, requires that 55% of the other countries in the EU agree to it. And if they do, it only amounts to a decision to take that legislation away and reconsider it, not to block it. And now I feel quite humiliated seeing my Prime Minister walking around the capitals of Europe and saying, can we change our own benefits system? I don't think that's acceptable. The negotiations have, in my view, not yet delivered, although I'm prepared to listen when they do. I think we should think carefully before going along with what is at the moment proposed. Downing Street itself has admitted that MEPs will have the power, potentially, to vote to change any agreement Mr Cameron comes back with once we've voted to accept it.
Christina, thank you very much. Claire, tell us, do you want to take that on now? Your multitude of hats, as you will.
Multitude of hats. And I must hasten to say that actually I'm the only one sitting across this table, apart from my learned colleague at the end that's actually at Stoke University. I'm actually speaking as the majority of the voters. I'm going to sit on this panel tonight as the average person that's walking down the street every day. So I'm not a politician. I'm not an academic. I'm actually going to be talking tonight from the heart as a mother who's worried about the future for her children. What I see is a very uncertain future. I'm very concerned about the instability at the moment. Obviously, the migrant issue is a big issue. We're all concerned about that and concerned about jobs for our children. But my fear is if we isolate ourselves, that we will become less of a voice than if we sit at a table with our fellow Europeans. So, although I'm still sitting very much on the fence, my feeling is to be isolated puts us in a more vulnerable position than actually being able to sit at a table and have a voice, if you like. So that's my very simplistic view. So I'm looking forward to the debate this evening.
Okay, right, thank you very much indeed. Or otherwise. And let's go for more of a sort of business angle. Mark Moore.
Good evening. This is clearly a very complex topic with multiple factors, but I've come wearing one hat tonight, and that's to bring a manufacturing business perspective to the debate. If we were to vote today, I would vote to stay in. I have no political allegiance, but I do believe that in the long term, UK manufacturing industry would suffer if we were to exit from the EU. That's my perspective this evening.
Okay, right, and our final... Someone else. Rupert.
Well, thank you, Justin. You did say in your introduction this is a very complex subject, and indeed it is. So forgive me, I think it's probably quite instructive if we just collectively walk through the history of the EU briefly. It is a post-war construct. It basically is fundamentally undemocratic in its structure. It was a creation of the post-war elite, really with the main aim of avoiding further wars in Europe. Its primary objective was effectively to cobble the nation-state and create a federal European superstate. And I think the quote by Jacques Delors in '93 probably sums it up pretty well. we're not here to make a single market. That doesn't interest me, but to make a political union. That is what Jacques Delors said. So I think ultimately, if you look at what's happened, and I always like to watch what the hands are doing rather than what the mouth is saying, you ultimately have watched, I think, a gross example of mis-selling by our great leaders to the electorate. What you have seen, really, 57 had the Treaty of Rome, that was a free trade treaty. You then had really the biggest surrender of British sovereignty in 72, which was the European Communities Act. In 1975, we had a referendum on free trade. The question for that was really, do you think the UK should stay in the common market, which again was a vote on free trade, not on sovereignty. We then had another absolutely shocking surrender of our sovereignty in 1987 with the Single European Act, and in 92 the Maastricht Treaty, which basically was also at the same time as we attempted to shadow the Deutschmark. And if you recall, we had what was then called Black Wednesday, which very rapidly became White Wednesday when Britain actually prospered outside this shadowing of the Deutschmark. In 97, the Referendum Party, basically Jimmy Goldsmith, we all owe him a huge vote of thanks. He spent £50 million trying to effectively elicit a promise from the major parties, all three of whom, we had Paddy Ashdown, we had John Major, and we had Tony Blair. All three of them were wedded to federal Europe, wedded to further European integration, and ultimately the Referendum Party forced a promise that we would indeed get a referendum before we surrendered our currency. Otherwise, we would be in the euro. Indeed, we were told that all the same stories which we're being told today about how it's essential that Britain is part of Europe, Britain has to be in Europe, Britain is a very important participant in Europe. Of course it is. Ultimately, Britain is a fantastic economy now. And I don't know what the audience thinks. It would be interesting to know, Justin, but does the audience think we should have joined the euro with the benefit of hindsight? I think probably most people here would say no. Well, our great leaders, let me tell you, were all in favour of it. So, as indeed their favour of further integration today. So, I think the fact we've got the pound, we now have a great economy as a result. We are almost a sovereign nation, but not quite. And we have a chance, a final chance, thanks to James Goldsmith and the Referendum Party, who, with their 800,000 votes, elicited this promise, that when the referendum finally comes, whether it's this June, whether it's in September, or indeed whether it's a year from now, personally I hope the longer period is what I would like, because I think the longer it goes, the more the wheels are going to fly off the European project, and I think the stronger the chance that the British electorate, ultimately, who are the main participant in this, have a chance to actually make a difference. The EU, I think we need to look at the EU. It's gradually fixed exchange rates never work. We're seeing it. Greece is completely bankrupt. Portugal, Spain, all the southern European nations can't live with the Deutschmark. Germany has benefited from the euro because it's effectively artificially kept our currency low, and effectively, gradually, a bit like a cancer, it's going to destroy itself. The problem is the bureaucrats who are unelected, and let me finish. Very important. This, who are unelected. Ultimately, they will not see the error of their ways until it's absolutely disastrous. So my own view, and I will wrap up now, I could say more, is that we the British have a chance now to take a position which returns sovereignty to the people. It doesn't mean we're not going to be part of Europe. We are part of Europe. We trade with Europe. We have a trade deficit with Europe in both commodities and in finished product. Europe's not going to stop trading with us. That's not going to happen. We can have a very friendly renegotiation with them, and ultimately, from the point of view of negotiation, we should now vote for Brexit, and ultimately that will strengthen our negotiating hand, because David Cameron, having promised at least 24 treaty changes, he's now down to 2. He's also we're not going to have a signed treaty before we vote.
Okay. Hands up. Who wants to leave? Who wants to stay in? Shame on you. what's that? I think we've got a slight majority for leave at the moment. Who else made up their mind then? That's quite a lot of people have made up their mind. Okay, thank you very much for being on. First of all, let's start from someone who probably wasn't around for the last referendum. Alex,
My
what have
view
you heard?
on the European Union.
Yeah.
It's always come down to a question of sovereignty for me and democracy. And if we look at the structure of the European Union, I don't see the democracy I would expect if that's going to be the future of the country. So you have the European Parliament, which is largely made up of two parliamentary groups, the S&D and the EPP, neither of which our MEPs are part of at all. We've got the council, and they basically just go over legislation and vote on it. And then we have the Commission, which is where legislation is drafted, the President of whom is entirely appointed, as is the Commission. The Council of Ministers is now almost entirely made up of qualified majority voting. We have 29 ministers as a country. Malta has 3, which means per head of population, a Maltese citizen has 15 times around about more power over more than half of the laws in this country than you do. I don't see how that's democratic, and I don't see how we can go on pretending that it is.
Okay, right. And Dr. Jim Keane.
Thank you. Obviously, I've got a bias with my background in economics, and I was saying earlier.
Well, if you're biased either way.
Yeah, we all have biases, of course, but for me, I remember the famous Clinton aide quote when Clinton asked his aide, what's the big issue, and he said, "It's the economy, stupid." And it really is for me. If I think about the EU and think about the future of the EU, and in an unfair way perhaps, quoting what Rupert said about this fantastic economy that we have, well, that fantastic economy has been in the EU for 40 years. And there are a lot of reasons that I believe why our future prosperity, economic prosperity, is very much connected to the future of the EU. For lots of reasons I suspect will come out today. And the more reading I've done of the migration issue, which I think is a big issue, certainly in the hearts of people, I've become more and more convinced that the solution to that problem, and there are issues obviously in that area, is at the EU level as well. So, forgive me, it is the economy stupid, and as an economist, I'm quite clear in my own mind that our future is in the EU because that's where our economy will prosper.
And that was one of those occasional moments. One of those occasional moments when Milton had something else on his mind, wasn't it?
Maybe. Yeah.
Okay. My view is I would like to see UK to stay as part of EU. Speaking as a Chinese citizen, I think I'm the only person on the panels not EU, not UK citizen, not EU citizen. So I'm outside. I look into the whole issue without really sort of bias, I would say. But I think UK would be, have a lot more national competitive advantage as part of EU. I think the whole point of the European Union is to have a much bigger sort of state and in terms of competitiveness. Because if you think about the very big economy, the number 1, number 2, leading economies in the world, we're talking about they are very big in terms of size and also population as well. And I think if UK is outside of EU, it will lose a lot of attractiveness for foreign investment, especially speaking from a China point of view. And President Xi Jinping said very clearly he was very worried about UK thinking about to leave EU. I think about from a future perspective, how you're going to actually compete as a relatively small country and with the big players in the world. And world has changed. The emerging markets like India, Russia, and Brazil, and their economy is growing relatively fast. And so how are we going to compete? I mean, I said that because I truly sort of worry about the future of UK if it's outside of EU.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just one point I want to pick up on, because I noticed there was a reaction from Alex Short about some of the comments that Christina was making about some of the legal issues here. Alex, do you want to just pick up on something?
No, it wasn't that. It was more that there was a suggestion that no UK leaders, it was something that Rupert said, were against us joining the euro. That's not the case. I mean, back in 1999, I was actually a speechwriter for William Hague, and the slogan was, "In Europe, not run by Europe." And it was made absolutely clear he did not want, and I shared this, for the United Kingdom to join the euro. He likened it, and we sort of wrote it together, to being in a burning building with no exits. And that was absolutely right. History has vindicated him on that. We should never join the euro.
Can I come back on that, Justin? That isn't right. In 1997, all three parties were wedded to the euro, Alex. It's just not right. And whatever William Hague wrote, the fact of the matter is John Major was in favour of the euro. And we would have had the euro. So that isn't right.
Gordon Brown was again, had this 5...
Gordon Brown was after the 97 election.
Okay, let's move on now to some questions. Graham Coates. Graham Coates, where are you? Any of you got a question particularly about... about joining a free trade group?
Yeah, one question, two parts. My country, the United Kingdom, were originally asked to join a free trade group called the Common Market. Is it possible, the first part of the question, is it possible to return to this? Second part of the question, if not, and we choose to remain, does that mean we're voting for an eventual European country? Let's cut it quick. Don't tell lies, don't mask it, don't hide it. Are we actually leading towards a European country? That's what I'd like the panel to answer.
Okay, well, let's first of all focus on this. I think, Mark, why don't you just come back on this on the business issue straight away?
Sure, and thank you very much for the question. First of all, I don't think it's possible to us to return to 1973. We started there with 9 countries, one of them being Greenland, and we're now up to 28 countries, and we have 40 years of history. So I don't think we can go backwards. We need to move forwards.
Hang on, so just give me a second. Just let him answer the question first, please. Thank you.
In terms of making a common market work without a fair degree of infrastructure in law, trade regulations and so on, it just doesn't work like that. The lawyers have to have their job. There is always going to be the issues of cross-border trade wherever those borders are drawn. And so I don't think we can imagine a panacea where there's a common market without a lot of bureaucratic baggage. I think being in the EU does make cross-border trade easier, but there is, of course, that whole business of the standards. And one of my big points tonight is that the EU is our biggest single export market, and the product standards, the management system standards will be set for that market, and we will have to trade into that market using those standards. And I'd much rather we were in those committees, setting those standards in a way that suits our manufacturing infrastructure, than being outside and simply having to react to them.
Well, we have an open market for trade, but certainly not for services at the moment. So that whole area hasn't developed.
That's correct.
So does that mean that's actually should change, must change, or is it going to be capable?
That's not my field.
Right. Okay. So on to the second part of it, does it mean if we're not having this, we end up with a super state?
Well, I certainly hope not. I don't think of myself as being European. Frankly, I don't even think of myself as being British. I think of myself as English, with an international perspective, cheering for England at the weekends. And I would be very uncomfortable, I think, if we moved towards a single European state. That's not how I would identify myself. And I hope that one of the things that comes out of David Cameron's work is to get away from this ever closer union philosophy that I simply don't believe in.
Christina, you had a point on your ears on that.
I think that my colleague is right. There is no way you can go back 40 years. We have to start from the position we're in, even if that's not where we want to be. There is nothing stopping us having free trade agreements with the members of the European Union, with the European Union itself, when we're not members of that union, if we withdraw. There is nothing to stop that happening. In fact, there are quite a lot of rules around world trade which actually prevent punitive measures being taken against the UK if we were to secede. So in terms of being able to continue to trade with Europe, then I think that is not in danger. Because as one of my other colleagues has mentioned, last year I think it was, we were running a 62 billion trade deficit with Europe. They are not going to say, okay, let's cut off our noses to spite our faces. It's just ridiculous to even think so. So in terms of trade agreements, yeah, we can have them. But can we have them and remain in the EU? Well, if we remain in the EU, we are going to become a European state. It may take some years, but that's where we're heading. Viviane Reding, she's the Vice President of the European Commission, longest serving Brussels Commissioner, and she called for a true political union to be put on the EU elections. We need to build a United States of Europe with the Commission as government and two chambers, the European Parliament and Senate of member states. The objective of the EU has been from its inception, when it was a common market as we all understood it, or those of us around at the time did, it's always been this ever closer union. I hope too that it can be stopped. I'm not convinced that if we vote to stay in, it will be. I think it's quite the contrary. We will be voting to become part of a European state.
Okay.